What happens a backroom best descent brilliant meets television's best acclimatized political announcer in what was declared to be her accepted morning appearance interview. The acknowledgement is television gold that Cypher saw coming. Before we dive into this absurd story, accomplish abiding you hit that subscribe button and let me apperceive in the comments what you anticipate absolutely acquired Karoline Leavitt to absolutely lose it on a live television. Trust me, this adventure has twists you won't see coming. The acceptable morning America flat bashed with its accepted pre-show activity as producers accolade to agree last-minute details. Karoline Leavitt sat in the bedfellow chair, adjusting her microphone with the accomplished affluence of Edition who had done hundreds of interviews. Above from her, George Stephanopoulos confused through his notes, advancing for what his aggregation had abreast as a above-board promotional account for Leavitt's latest book on bourgeois politics. The cameras formed and Stephanopoulos opened with his brand-able smile. "Good morning, Karoline. Thanks for abutting us today." "Good to be here, George," Leavitt replied, clearing a back in her armchair with that appropriate New Hampshire confidence. "So, let's allocution about your new book, Edition Bourgeois Manifesto. Breadth you position yourself as the articulation of abandoned Americans. Some critics are added you're aloof repeating the aforementioned talking credibility over and over. How do you acknowledge to that?" Leavitt's announcement confused slightly, the accessible smile abbreviating about the edges. "Well, George, I anticipate those critics' ability appetite to absolutely apprehend the book afore they address their reviews. Anniversary action position I apostle brings article altered to the table." Stephanopoulos leaned forward, analysis and befalling to dig deeper. "But isn't there a arrangement here? The adolescent bourgeois from New Hampshire who saves America through acceptable ethics and America Aboriginal policies. Some ability say you're aloof arena variations of the aforementioned political character." The flat admirers remained silent, but backstage producers began to booty notice. This wasn't the ablaze promotional badinage they had planned. "You apperceive what, George?" Leavitt's articulation agitated a new edge. "Maybe the botheration isn't that I'm actuality consistent. Maybe the botheration is that Washington doesn't apperceive how to represent accurate Americans anymore. Aback you abound up breadth I grew up. Aback you've lived the activity I've lived, actuality in backroom matters." Stephanopoulos nodded, but his announcer instincts were now absolutely engaged. "Speaking of authenticity, let's allocution about your accelerated rise. You've gone from about alien to a loft political amount actual quickly. Do you anytime anguish that your affliction ability be capricious accustomed the belvedere you now have?" The catechism afraid in the air like a challenge, Leavitt's jaw anchored visibly, and for a moment, the abandoned complete in the flat was the quiet hum of the cameras. "That's an absorbing way to put it, George," Leavitt said, her articulation deceptively calm. "Irresponsible. Let me ask you something. Except you anytime been in a bearing's breadth you had to action for your political life? Except you anytime lived in a association breadth your articulation wasn't article the enactment capital to hear, but article that bent whether absolute Americans got represented?" Stephanopoulos maintained his composure, but there was a new restriction in his posture. "Karoline, I'm not analytic your claimed experiences. I'm allurement about the albatross that comes with actuality a political leader." "Political leader?" Leavitt laughed, but there was no amusement in it. "George, I never asked to be anybody's political savior. What I did ask for was adventitious to represent behavior that matter. Behavior for absolute bodies adverse absolute problems. But guys like you appetite to abate aggregate to some enactment talking point. I don't anticipate allurement about political albatross is abbreviation annihilation to enactment politics." Stephanopoulos countered his own articulation accepting intensity. "You accept millions of supporters, abounding of them adolescent people. Don't you anticipate you owe them something?" Leavitt leaned advanced in her chair, closing the ambit amid them. "What I owe them is honesty. What I owe them is assuming them that you can claiming the system. You can appear from boilerplate and you can still body article meaningful. What I don't owe them is assuming to be a career babykisser for the abundance of bodies who've never faced absolute bread-and-butter adversity." The flat had gone absolutely quiet. Alike the camera better seemed frozen, borderline whether to accumulate rolling or cut to commercial. Stephanopoulos apprenticed on, his announcer training cardinal any affair about the growing tension. "But Karoline, don't you see the contradiction? You accumulation from criticizing the enactment while accompanying acceptable allotment of the political apparatus yourself." That was the breaking point. Leavitt stood up abruptly, her armchair rolling backward. "Profit? You appetite to allocution about profit, George?" Let's allocution about how account networks accumulation from abhorrence and division. Let's allocution about how political commentators accumulation from befitting Americans affronted and divided. At atomic aback I apostle for policies, bodies apperceive I'm angry for their interests. Stephanopoulos charcoal seated, but his articulation rose to bout Leavitt's intensity. That's not the aforementioned thing, and you apperceive it. We're talking about your albatross as a political leader. No, George. We're talking about your charge to actualize altercation breadth none exists. Leavitt advanced back. This was declared to be about my book, but you've angry it into some affectionate of political hit job. The host's able address began to crack. Nobody's administering a hit job. These are accepted questions that any austere announcer would ask. Austere journalist. Leavitt's articulation agitated a alarming edge. Now, is that what you alarm yourself? Because from breadth I'm standing, you attending like addition enactment advocate aggravating to account credibility by disturbing bottom-ward addition who absolutely represents alive Americans. Stephanopoulos stood up now, too. The pretense of a affable account absolutely abandoned. I've been accomplishing journalism aback afore you were in politics, Karoline. I don't charge lectures on candor from addition whose abstraction of action development is acquirement's new means to advance the enactment on amusing media. The insult landed. Like a concrete blow. Leavitt's face ablaze red, and for a moment, the aloft advance fighter from New Hampshire was arresting beneath the able political veneer. Is that what you absolutely think? Leavitt asked, her articulation bottom-ward to her advancing whisper. That I'm aloof some charlatan who got lucky. Stephanopoulos straightened his tie, a afraid action that betrayed his growing anxiety acceptance his advance to advance journalistic authority. Karoline, I never said you were an opportunist, but you can't abjure that your career has been congenital on an actual specific blazon of political rhetoric. You're right, George, Leavitt said, demography a footfall afterpiece to the board that afar them. My career has been congenital on April article real. Behavior that appearance alive bodies they matter, that they acquire our account hearing. What's your career congenital on? Allurement antic questions to bodies who absolutely actualize change. The flat aggregation exchanged afraid glances. This was ambageous far aloft annihilation they had able for, and the bartering breach wasn't appointed for addition 8 minutes. My career is congenital on captivation accessible abstracts accountable, Stephanopoulos replied, his articulation steady, but his duke white as he absorbed his basis cards. When addition has the belvedere you have, they should apprehend scrutiny. Answerable for what exactly? Leavitt's New Hampshire emphasis was acceptable added arresting with anniversary word. For April people. For giving them behavior that appearance them they can affected their circumstances, or are you aggravating to ascendancy me answerable for accepting the adventurousness to accomplish acceptance arduous the establishment? Stephanopoulos acquainted the account bottom-ward abroad from him, but his advancing instincts kicked in. I'm aggravating to accept an honest chat about the letters your backroom send, abnormally to adolescent bodies who ability see altercation as a band-aid to their problems. Altercation as a solution? Leavitt laughed bitterly. George, except you absolutely apprehend any of my action positions, or did you aloof apprehend the talking credibility your analysis aggregation handed you? Because if you had apprehend them, you'd apperceive that in about every distinct case, a cord through backbone is apparent as the goal. America aboriginal behavior that account everyone. But it's still divisive, isn't it? Stephanopoulos pressed. The messaging consistently positions you adjoin the establishment, adjoin the media. What affectionate of bulletin does that send? Leavitt befuddled her arch in frustration. The bulletin it sends is that sometimes patriots accept to angle up to base systems. That sometimes a back government fails, accustomed Americans accept to acquisition the adventuresomeness to appeal better. But you wouldn't accept that, would you, George? Because you've spent your accomplished career cautiously oral the establishment, allurement questions, but never accepting to alive with the after-effects of bootless policies. The claimed advance hit its mark. Stephanopoulos' able accord absurd visibly. That's absolutely arbitrary and you apperceive it. Journalism is about allurement difficult questions, not about experiencing every action personally. Is it though? Leavitt challenged because it seems to me like journalism has become about creating narratives that fit whatever enactment calendar sells the best advertising. You came into this account with your adventure already accounting in your head, didn't you? I came into this account able to ask accepted questions about your assignment and its impact. Stephanopoulos advanced back. If you can't handle that akin of scrutiny, maybe you shouldn't be accomplishing politics. The advancement that she couldn't handle burden was like bouncing a red banderole in advance of a bull. Leavitt's eyes flashed with 18-carat anger. Handle scrutiny, George. I've been scrutinized my absolute political career by enactment politicians, by boilerplate media, by bodies who anticipate they apperceive who I am because of my age or background. The aberration amid me and you is that a back bodies analyze me. I don't adumbrate abaft some affected objectivity. I own my positions. And what about the best to airing abroad from this interview? Stephanopoulos asked, his articulation accustomed to attenuate challenge. Because that's what you're doing. Appropriate now, isn't it? Active abroad aback the questions get too tough. The allegation chock-full Leavitt cold. For a moment, she stood altogether still, processing the association that she was a coward. Aback she batten again. Her articulation was alarmingly quiet. You anticipate I'm active away. Stephanopoulos sensed he had regained some control. Think you're acclimated to interviews breadth bodies ask you softball questions about your latest advance action and your action positions? I anticipate a back edition asks you to anticipate alarmingly about your impact. You get defensive. Defensive. Leavitt afresh the chat like she was tasting article bitter. George, you appetite to see defensive. Arresting is what you're accomplishing appropriate now. Ambuscade abaft your announcer accreditation to abstain acceptance that you absolved into this account attractive for a fight. I'm accomplishing my job. Stephanopoulos insisted. Your job. Leavitt's articulation rose again. Your job is declared to be allegorical people, not creating ball for ratings. But that's what this is absolutely about, isn't it? You charge article arguable to appear because your appearance is bleeding admirers to absolute media and amusing platforms. The allegation addled a butting to home and Stephanopoulos' able affectation slipped completely. That's ridiculous. Acceptable Morning America has been the top morning appearance for years. Has it though? Leavitt apprenticed her advantage. Because from what I hear, you guys are disturbing to breach accordant in a apple breadth bodies can get their account from anywhere. So, you allure me on acquisitive I'll say article brainless so you can accept your viral moment. Cipher capital U to say annihilation stupid, Karoline. We capital U to accept an able chat about your work. Able conversation. Leavitt scoffed. This isn't intelligent, George. This is you aggravating to accomplish abuse because you anticipate it'll get you trending on amusing media. Well, congratulations. Your allegedly activity to get your wish. Stephanopoulos accomplished the account had absolutely derailed, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. If this is what passes for address from today's political leaders, afresh maybe the critics accept a point about the accompaniment of American politics. The arrogant accent was the final straw. Leavitt's easily clenched into fists at her abandon and anybody in the flat could see her angry the actuation to do article that would end her political career. You apperceive what, George, you're appropriate about one thing. This chat is over. Leavitt began to deliver her microphone, but Stephanopoulos wasn't finished. So that's it. Aback the chat gets challenging. Karoline Leavitt aloof walks away. I assumption that's the affectionate of baton your backroom absolutely celebrate. Addition who quits aback things get difficult. The words chock-full Leavitt asleep in her tracks. Her duke froze on the microphone blow and slowly, deliberately, she angry aback to face the host. The attending in her eyes fabricated several aggregation associates booty and benumbed footfall backward. What did you aloof say? Leavitt's articulation was almost aloft a whisper, but it agitated above the bashful flat like a threat. Stephanopoulos knew he had above a line, but his journalistic ego wouldn't let him retreat. I said, maybe this is who you absolutely are. Addition who talks boxy but runs aback faced with absolute scrutiny. Absolute scrutiny. Leavitt confused aback against the account area. But this time, she didn't sit down. She stood anon in advance of Stephanopoulos' desk, looming over the built-in host. You appetite absolute scrutiny, George? Let's allocution about absolute scrutiny. Let's allocution about growing up a live class, watching your association attack while politicians avoid them. Let's allocution about arduous and absolute base arrangement and award a way to body article meaningful. Anyway, Karoline, amuse sit down, Stephanopoulos said. But his articulation lacked its beforehand authority. No, I don't anticipate I will, Leavitt replied. See, you alleged me a quitter, George. And that's article I can't let slide. Because if there's one affair I've never been in my absolute political career, it's a quitter. Aback I was starting in backroom and anybody said I was too young, I didn't quit. Aback I was active campaigns and critics said I'd never be taken seriously, I didn't quit. Aback, I challenged the enactment, and they said I'd never succeed. I didn't quit. The affection in her articulation was magnetic. Alike the adverse flat admirers begin themselves aptitude forward, bent up in her words acceptance the afflictive tension. But here's what absolutely gets me, Leavitt continued, her articulation accepting momentum. You sit abaft that board in your big-ticket clothing with your enactment credentials, and you adjudicate me for the positions I've taken. You catechism whether I'm an acceptable leader, whether my assignment has value, whether I deserve the success I've earned. But what accept you built, George? What accept you created that didn't abide afore you came along? Stephanopoulos approved to interrupt. Karoline, I anticipate you're confounding the purpose of journalism. No, I accept perfectly. Leavitt cut him off. The purpose of journalism acclimated to be allegorical the public. Now it's about disturbing bodies bottomward for sport. It's about award the affliction accessible estimation of aggregate and active with it because battle gets clicks. That's not what this is, Stephanopoulos protested. But his articulation articulate weak, alike to his own ears. Afresh, what is it? Leavitt demanded. Because from breadth I'm standing, this looks like a hit job. You arrive me actuality beneath apocryphal pretenses. Spent 15 account aggravating to accomplish me attending bad. And now you appetite to alarm me a craven because I won't comedy forth with your game. The flat administrator was aimlessly signaling to cut to commercial. But the cameraman kept rolling. Analysis they were witnessing article unprecedented. Stephanopoulos fabricated one aftermost advance to achieve control. Karoline, I anticipate your actuality anytime acute about accepted questions apropos your access on American politics. Anytime sensitive. Leavitt's beam was acrid and bitter. George, let me acquaint you about sensitive. Acute is growing up alive chic and accepting bodies except you're not acute abundant for backroom because of your background. Acute is alive your ass off to represent bodies and accepting others aspect it to luck. Acute is aggravating to use your belvedere to apparatus elusive behavior and accepting some talking-headed abate your absolute career to adolescent woman who attacks establishment. I never said that. Stephanopoulos protested. You didn't accept to say it directly. Leavitt replied. It was in every question, every insinuation, every arrogant animadversion about my experience. You apperceive what the absolute irony is, George. You allege my backroom of announcement divisiveness, but you're the one who came in actuality attractive for a fight. The accuracy of that account affrayed in the air like an accusation. Alike Stephanopoulos seemed to apprehend how far he had pushed things aloft a accustomed interview. Look, Karoline. He said, aggravating to acquisition some average ground. Maybe we got off on the amiss bottom here. Why don't we alpha over an allocution about your book? But Leavitt wasn't accepting it. Alpha over, George. You don't get to absorb 20 account aggravating to breach me bottom ward and a fresh ask for a duva because you accomplished its not arena well. This is who you are. This is what you do. You body your career on added people's discomfort. That's not fair, Stephanopoulos said. But alike he could apprehend how alveolate it sounded. Fair. Leavitt befuddled her arch in disbelief. You appetite to allocution about fair? Is it fair that you get to sit there and adjudicate my absolute political career based on some agreed narrative? Is it fair that you get to catechism my appearance while ambuscade abaft the pretense of objectivity? The host approved one added time to deliver this situation. Karoline, I'm apologetic if you acquainted attacked. That wasn't my intention. Your ambition doesn't matter, George. What affairs is what you did. And what you did was allure me actuality to advance my book and afresh absorb the accomplished time aggravating to accomplish me attending like some affectionate of agitator who doesn't deserve success. I never alleged you an extremist, Stephanopoulos said weakly. You didn't accept to, Leavitt replied. It was in every loaded question, every agnostic look, every arrogant tone. You apperceive what's funny. You're afraid about the letters my backroom send. But what bulletin are you sending appropriate now? That if you appear from a working-class background, if you claiming the system, if you represent abandoned Americans, you don't deserve respect. The flat had gone absolutely silent. Anybody present knew they were witnessing article that would be talked about for years to come. Leavitt looked anon into the capital camera. You apperceive what? I anticipate bodies are acute abundant to accept the aberration amid political advancement and reality. I anticipate they are acute abundant to acknowledge leaders who action for redemption, about additional chances, about accustomed Americans accomplishing amazing things. But allegedly some bodies in the media anticipate voters are too brainless to accomplish those distinctions. She angry aback to Stephanopoulos, who looks a bait somehow, beneath by the confrontation. So here's what's activity to happen, George. I'm activity to airing out of actuality, and your activity to accept your viral moment. Bodies are activity to watch this blow and altercate about who was appropriate and who was wrong. But at the end of the day, I'll still be angry for behavior that amount to people, and you'll still be sitting abaft this board attractive for the abutting being to breach down. Leavitt accomplished for her microphone again, but this time, Stephanopoulos didn't try to stop her. One added thing, Leavitt said as she unclipped the device. Abutting time you appetite to accept an honest chat about my work. Try absolutely account it first. You ability apprentice article about the aberration amid announcement analysis and assuming the absolute amount of enactment failures. With that, she abandoned the microphone on Stephanopoulos's board and absolved against the flat exit. The cameras followed her until she abolished through the door, abrogation abaft a abashed host and a flat abounding of bodies who knew they had aloof witnessed television history. Stephanopoulos sat abandoned at his board for several continued abnormal for assuredly attractive into the camera and saying, "Will be appropriate back afterwards this bartering break," but anybody knew that annihilation would anytime be absolutely the aforementioned afterwards what had aloof happened on a live television. What did you anticipate of that atomic confrontation? Did Karoline Leavitt go too far, or was George Stephanopoulos allurement for it with his advancing questioning? Drop your thoughts in the comments beneath and accomplish abiding to subscribe for added absurd belief of politicians accident they air-conditioned on a live television.